In the dead of night, the warning sirens begin before the full picture is even clear. Radar screens flash, command rooms tighten, and somewhere over the Middle East, the possibility of an Iranian hypersonic missile strike forces every planner in Israel and Washington to confront the same unsettling question. What happens when speed, maneuverability, and saturation begin to outrun even the most sophisticated air defense network on Earth? This is not a confirmed battlefield report. It is a scenario-based military analysis of a threat that is now impossible to ignore. If Iran were to launch a coordinated strike built around hypersonic or quasi-hypersonic systems paired with drones, decoys, and conventional ballistic missiles, the entire logic of Israel's layered defense could be tested under extreme stress. The target could be an airbase, a command node, a strategic radar site, or a missile defense battery. The effect would not need to be total destruction to be strategically devastating. Even limited penetration, even a handful of successful impacts, could send a message far louder than the explosions themselves. That is the real crisis now hanging over the region. It is not just about one missile. It is about whether the age of reliable interception is beginning to crack. It is about whether the Pentagon, despite enormous reach and unrivaled technological depth, is facing a battlefield geometry that no longer responds the way it did in the past. And if you are watching this because you want the deeper military picture, stay with us until the end. Like the video, subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell us in the comments where you stand on this question. If Iran can seriously threaten Israel's air defense shield, does that change the balance of power across the entire Middle East? Because the biggest questions are now impossible to avoid. How would Iran actually execute such a strike? Why could Israel's defenses struggle against it, even with multiple interception layers? Why does Washington appear increasingly cautious every time the escalation ladder rises? And what would it mean for American power if one of its closest regional allies could no longer rely on near total protection from incoming missile threats? There's also a larger question, one that reaches far beyond one battlefield and one night of crisis. If advanced missile warfare is shifting the cost and risk equation this dramatically, are we watching the early stages of a new multipolar military order where even smaller or sanctioned powers can impose unacceptable pressure on major US-backed systems? That question is no longer theoretical. It is becoming operational. To understand why this matters, we need to start with the architecture of the threat itself. Iran has spent years developing a layered missile force designed not merely for deterrence, but for survivability, volume, and psychological impact. This force includes short-range ballistic missiles, medium-range systems, cruise missiles, loitering munitions, and increasingly claims of maneuverable high-speed weapons that can challenge traditional intercept geometry. Among the most discussed systems is the Fattah, presented by Iran as a hypersonic missile capable of maneuvering inside and beyond the atmosphere at extreme speed. Whether every public claim made about this weapon is fully accurate is still debated by defense analysts, but in strategic terms, the exact label matters less than the operational implication. If a missile can travel fast enough, maneuver late enough, and arrive amid enough confusion, it can compress the defender's response time to a dangerous degree. That is the nightmare for air defense commanders. Israel's defensive umbrella is formidable, but it is not magic. Iron Dome is optimized primarily for shorter range threats and mass rocket interception. David Sling is designed to address more complex medium-range threats. The Arrow family focuses on high-altitude ballistic missile interception. Together, these systems create one of the most advanced layered shields in the world. But layering does not equal invulnerability. Every defense system has thresholds, every radar has blind angles, clutter limitations, and reaction windows. Every interceptor stockpile is finite. And every command network, no matter how sophisticated, must process incoming data in real time while distinguishing between decoys, drones, ballistic arcs, cruise profiles, and potentially maneuvering high-speed targets. War is not a laboratory. It is confusion multiplied by speed. Now imagine the timeline of a crisis. The clock is moving past 2 in the morning. Regional intelligence has already detected unusual activity at multiple launch areas inside Iran and possibly from a partner. Militia zones beyond it. The first wave is not the main strike. It is the shaping wave. Slow drones lift off first, low cost and expendable, designed to force early tracking, create noise, and draw defensive attention toward multiple axes. Minutes later, the second wave emerges. This is where the pressure begins to build. A salvo of conventional ballistic missiles rises on steep trajectories, some aimed at military infrastructure, others functioning as decoys or as tools of saturation. The point is not only to destroy, the point is to flood the defender's decision cycle. The radar picture grows crowded, the timing windows narrow. Interceptor allocation becomes a brutal calculation. And then comes the most dangerous phase. If Iran were to integrate a small number of maneuverable high-speed missiles into that attack package, the entire engagement sequence could change. The defender would not simply be trying to swat down predictable ballistic arcs. It would be trying to classify, prioritize, and intercept weapons that may alter course during descent, reduce warning time, and exploit gaps created by the earlier waves. In such a scenario, even a few minutes matter enormously. A missile launched from western Iran toward Israeli territory could arrive on a timeline short enough to leave almost no room for repeated engagement attempts, especially if the target profile shifts during flight. If air defense crews fire too early, they waste precious interceptors. If they fire too late, they may lose the shot entirely. This is the deadly mathematics of compression. And that brings us to the central military concept here, saturation. A modern air defense network can defeat an extraordinary number of incoming threats, but it can still be strained by volume, diversity, and sequencings. This is not simply a contest between one missile and one interceptor. It is a contest between offensive design and defensive capacity. The attacker wants to overload sensors, deplete magazines, split attention, and force mistakes. Decoy drones are critical to the strategy. They are cheap compared to the systems sent to stop them. They can fly low, arrive from multiple directions, and trigger responses that consume both energy and inventory. If the defender launches expensive interceptors against low-cost decoys, the cost-exchange ratio tilts in favor of the attacker. And once enough confusion builds, the more dangerous weapons can follow through a defense grid that is busy, tired, and partially blinded. Electronic warfare could make the problem worse. No one should assume that missile battles are fought by kinetics alone. Signal disruption, spoofing, communication interference, radar clutter, and cyber pressure can all widen cracks in a car defensive shield. Even a momentary delay in data fusion between detection systems and launch batteries can alter the outcome when the incoming weapon is moving at extreme speed. This is why the phrase air defense failure can be misleading if it is used too casually. In reality, a defensive network does not need to collapse completely to produce a strategic shock. It only needs to fail at the wrong point, against the wrong target, at the wrong time. One penetrated command center, one runway disabled, one strategic radar knocked offline, one missile battery damaged. In military terms, partial failure can produce full psychological effect, and that psychological effect is enormous. Israel's deterrent image has long rested not only on offensive power, intelligence reach, and rapid mobilization, but also on the belief that its homeland defenses can absorb and blunt large-scale attacks better than almost any nation in its environment. If an Iranian strike package were ever seen to puncture that shield in a meaningful way, the strategic echo would travel far beyond the blast radius. The Pentagon understands this better than most. Any major Iranian missile breakthrough against Israeli defenses would not be seen internationally as a local technical problem. It would be read as a stress test of the wider American security, the architecture in the region. Washington supplies, integrates, supports, and politically guarantees much of the strategic environment in which Israel operates. If that environment looks vulnerable, American credibility absorbs the shock. That is why every serious escalation in this theater now risks pulling the United States toward emergency decision-making. Carrier strike groups can move. Additional air defense assets can be repositioned. Intelligence sharing can intensify, and regional bases can elevate alert levels. But each of those responses carries political and military cost. Reinforcement may deter. It may also signal fear. It may reassure allies. It may also expose how badly reassurance is needed. There is another uncomfortable truth here. Even the most powerful military on Earth cannot be everywhere, intercept everything, and impose unlimited escalation without consequence. The United States can project power across oceans, maintain advanced surveillance, and deploy high-end systems at speed. But it is still constrained by distance, domestic politics, alliance friction, escalation risk, and the possibility of a wider regional war that nobody can fully control once it starts. This helps explain Washington's hesitation whenever the region moves toward the edge. The United States is not simply asking whether it can strike back. It is asking what comes after. Would retaliation trigger attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq, Syria, or the Gulf? Would shipping lanes come under pressure? Would energy markets panic? Would regional militias open secondary fronts? Would a direct clash with Iran ignite something that no carrier group, no matter how powerful, could quickly contain? Those are not signs of weakness in the simplistic sense. They are signs of strategic burden. Great powers do not merely fight with force. They fight with responsibility, exposure, and the knowledge that one wrong move can trigger cascading commitments. The problem for Washington is that adversaries understand this burden and increasingly build doctrines around it. In that sense, missile warfare is not just about hardware. It is about political leverage. From Iran's perspective, missile development has long been the answer to structural disadvantages. Tehran cannot match the United States or Israel aircraft for aircraft, carrier for carrier, or stealth platform for stealth platform. It therefore invests in asymmetric tools that survive sanctions, avoid dependence on foreign suppliers, and threaten high-value targets at relatively sustainable cost. This is military adaptation under pressure. And in many ways, it is exactly what sanctions were supposed to prevent. Instead, sanctions may have accelerated self-reliance in critical sectors. When a state feels locked out of conventional procurement and exposed to technologically superior rivals, it often doubles down on domestic missile engineering, underground infrastructure, dispersal doctrine, and redundancy. That does not automatically produce unstoppable weapons, but it can produce a force difficult to preempt, difficult to exhaust, and dangerous to underestimate. The broader strategic consequence is sobering. If Iran can create enough uncertainty around interception, it does not need perfect capability to achieve deterrent effect. It only needs credible doubt. It only needs Israeli and American planners to lose confidence in guaranteed protection. In warfare, certainty is oxygen. Once doubt enters the room, posture changes, timelines shrink, and political calculations harden. Now, consider the Israeli side of this equation more closely. Israel's air defense system is often described as layered, but layers are not independent walls. They are interconnected processes that must function under enormous pressure. Detection, classification, tracking, decision, launch, mid-course correction, terminal engagement, battle damage assessment, and reload planning all happen under stress. If the attacker attacks the process itself, the elegance of the architecture becomes a vulnerability. A saturation attack can exploit that vulnerability in several ways. First, by forcing a radar picture crowded with different object types at different speeds and altitudes. Second, by triggering interceptor expenditure against objects that are threatening enough to demand action but cheap enough to favor the attacker. Third, by introducing a small number of highly dangerous missiles after the defender's engagement logic has already been stretched. This is not brute force alone. It is designed chaos. And then there is the issue of inventory. Interceptors are expensive. They are also not produced in unlimited quantities at unlimited speed. If a conflict becomes sustained rather than episodic, defensive stockpiles become a strategic variable. Attackers know this. They can use lower cost waves to force high cost defensive responses over time. The objective is not always immediate penetration. Sometimes it is attrition of readiness itself. This cost exchange advantage has become one of the defining features of modern regional warfare. A drone that costs a tiny fraction of an interceptor can still compel a launch if it threatens a protected asset. A ballistic missile need not be perfectly accurate if it contributes to forcing defensive expenditure and saturating the network. Over time, the offense can impose pressure simply by being persistent, adaptive, and economical. If a hypersonic or near hypersonic element is added to that equation, the danger rises sharply. Speed alone is not the whole story. Speed combined with maneuverability, uncertain trajectory, and multi-wave deception can make the defense feel as though it is always one cycle behind. So, even a strong system can begin to fight reactively instead of proactively, and once that happens, the attacker starts shaping the battle. This is why so much attention is focused on command and control. Missiles do not defeat defense systems only by punching through steel and concrete. They can also degrade the defender's ability to see clearly, communicate rapidly, and allocate force rationally. If command nodes are disrupted or if operators are forced into fragmented local decisions under a flood of threats, the defense becomes less coherent with each passing minute. In the most dangerous scenario, the breakdown is not visual, it is cognitive, and operators face too many tracks, too many unknowns, and too little time. Decision makers must choose which targets to defend and which risks to accept. Strategic sites, population centers, air bases, and communications nodes cannot all be treated equally in every moment. That means some incoming threats will be prioritized and some may slip through simply because no defense can cover everything at once. This is the point at which the military crisis becomes a political crisis. If Israeli defenses were perceived to have failed against a major Iranian strike package, domestic pressure would explode. Questions would surge through every institution. Was intelligence sufficient? Were launch sites missed? Were the wrong assets defended first? Were stockpiles adequate? Was the threat underestimated? In wartime, such questions do not wait for calm commissions. They arrive in the smoke. For the United States, the political aftershock would be equally severe. Emergency meetings at the Pentagon would not be about abstract capability charts. They would be about options, commitments, red lines, and consequences. Should additional missile defense assets be rushed into theater? Should naval forces move closer or remain offset to reduce vulnerability? Should Washington authorize a wider retaliatory posture, or would that risk a region-wide escalation no one can safely map? This is where fear of regional war shapes everything. A direct US-Iran spiral would not unfold in a vacuum. It could spill into Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, the Red Sea, the Gulf, and beyond. Proxy networks might activate. Maritime traffic could come under pressure. Insurance markets could surge. Energy prices could spike. Air bases and embassies would move to maximum alert. The very density of the region's military geography makes every decision more dangerous. And that is exactly why Washington hesitates. Not because it does not possess overwhelming force, It does. The hesitation comes from the recognition that overwhelming force is not the same as effortless control. In a region saturated with missiles, militias, sectarian fault lines, and strategic choke points, every strike has second-order and third-order effects. Deterrence now operates in both directions. This two-way deterrence is one of the most important changes in the modern Middle East. For decades, the dominant image was one of largely one-sided escalation control, where superior Western or Western-backed power could impose punishment and restore order at acceptable cost. And that assumption now looks weaker, not gone, but weaker. States like Iran have spent years building tools specifically designed to make retaliation expensive, politically risky, and regionally contagious. That shift matters beyond the region. Russia, China, and North Korea are all watching the same battlefield evolution through different lenses. Moscow sees the continued centrality of missile warfare and the strategic value of exhausting advanced defenses. Beijing sees lessons about anti-Axis pressure, cost imposition, and the vulnerability of prestige systems under saturation. Pyongyang sees validation for a doctrine centered on survivable missiles and escalation complexity. None of these states need to copy Iran exactly to learn from its model. The lesson is broader. A determined state under pressure can invest in selective technologies that do not defeat a superpower symmetrically, but do complicate the superpower's operational freedom. This is one of the clearest signatures of a world drifting away from unipolar military confidence. The old assumption was that sanctions, isolation, and precision strike dominance would steadily widen the gap between the strongest powers and their regional adversaries, yet in practice, adaptation has often narrowed the practical freedom of stronger states in specific theaters, not because the stronger state became weak, but because the weaker state became dangerous enough to impose hesitation. That is a profound strategic change. We should be careful not to exaggerate. Israel remains a militarily powerful state with deep intelligence capabilities, advanced aerospace assets, and an integrated defensive structure envied around the world. The United States remains the most capable expeditionary military power on the planet. But recognizing strength does not require denying vulnerability. In fact, serious analysis begins where comforting myths end. And one of the most comforting myths in modern warfare has been the myth of near-perfect defense. It is a myth born from remarkable technological achievements, reinforced by successful interceptions, and amplified by public messaging that often needs certainty more than nuance. But no shield is perfect. No layer is infinite. No command network is immune to surprise, overload, or adaptation by an intelligent adversary. That is why the hypersonic conversation has generated such intense concern. Even when public claims outrun verified data, the strategic imagination responds to the possibility itself. What if warning time shrinks further? What if maneuverable payloads become more common? What if decoys become smarter? What if the cost of defense continues to rise while the cost of offense continues to fall? And each of those questions erodes confidence before a missile is ever launched. Confidence matters because deterrence is partly psychological. A state that believes it can absorb and defeat an incoming strike behaves differently from a state that fears key assets may be exposed. Allies behave differently too. So do rivals, markets, publics, and military planners all respond to confidence signals. And when those signals flicker, the strategic atmosphere changes even before the battlefield does. In this sense, the current crisis is not only about Iran and Israel. It is about the future of missile defense as a pillar of regional order. If advanced defenses can be pressured, saturated, or selectively bypassed by increasingly accessible offensive systems, then every alliance framework built on those defenses must adapt. Procurement changes, basing changes, command concepts change. So do political promises. For Israel, adaptation may require not only more interceptors, but more dispersal, harder redundancy, faster battlefield networking, better low-cost counter-drone solutions, and more resilient command architecture. For the United States, it may mean rethinking how to support allies in a region where the tempo of missile warfare is accelerating faster than the political appetite for direct intervention. Protection cannot rely on prestige alone. There is also a wider industrial dimension. Missile defense is not just a military issue. It is a production issue, a logistics issue, and a budget issue. How fast can interceptors be built? How rapidly can batteries be reloaded and repositioned? How resilient are supply chains in a prolonged crisis? Can high-end systems be preserved for high-end threats while cheaper tools address lower-end swarms? These questions are no longer theoretical procurement debates. They are war-fighting realities. The phrase "new Middle East crisis," therefore, understates the scale of what may be unfolding. This is not simply another flare-up defined by familiar rhetoric and temporary alarm. It may be part of a deeper transition in how regional deterrence works, how alliances are tested, and how power is measured. Firepower still matters, technology still matters, but adaptability, inventory, depth, and political stamina may matter even more. And if we step back even further, the implications become global. The more missile warfare undermines confidence in concentrated military superiority, the more the international system shifts toward distributed deterrence and selective vulnerability. That is one of the foundations of a multipolar world, not equal power, but more actors with enough denial capability to complicate the strong. Iran's strategic message, whether exaggerated in its public claims or not, points in that direction. It says that resilience can be built under sanctions. It says that expensive defense can be pressured by cheaper offense. It says that geography can be weaponized through range and timing. And it says that states, once treated mainly as targets, can become sources of serious deterrent friction. That does not mean the old order disappears overnight. It means the old order is under strain. It means the assumptions that held it together are burning at the edges. The image of effortless dominance, of uninterrupted interception, of uncontested escalation control is being challenged by a harsher and more crowded reality. If a future Iranian hypersonic or mixed missile strike were ever to significantly penetrate Israeli defenses, the symbolism would be enormous. The blast would be physical, but the deeper damage would be conceptual. The myth of invincibility would not vanish completely, but it would be shattered enough for every capital in the region to hear the crack. That is why this issue deserves attention now, before headlines force the conversation into panic. The question is not whether every claim about every missile is proven beyond doubt. The question is whether the strategic trend is real, and all evidence suggests it is. Faster threats, more layered attacks, greater use of decoys, greater pressure on defensive inventories, more caution in Washington, more risk for everyone. So where does this leave us? It leaves us in a world where power is still immense, but no longer feels absolute, where air defense remains essential, but no longer guarantees comfort, where regional actors can impose strategic anxiety on stronger states through carefully built missile doctrines, and where one night of warfare, or even the credible threat of one night of warfare, can alter the calculations of capitals far from the launch site. The old order is not gone, but it is burning. The shield is not broken, but its limits are more visible than before. The balance of power has not fully shifted, but it is moving, and that movement is what every military planner in the region now has to study with brutal seriousness. If you have stayed with us to this point, tell us what you think. Can Israel's air defense network adapt fast enough to meet the next generation of Iranian missile threats? Is Washington's hesitation a sign of restraint, realism, or declining confidence And are we witnessing the early stages of a broader shift toward a more dangerous, more contested, more multipolar military order? Like the video if you want more deep geopolitical military analysis. Subscribe for future breakdowns, turn on notifications so you do not miss the next report, and leave your strongest opinion in the comments. Because the next crisis may not arrive with a warning. It may arrive at extreme speed through a crowded sky against a defense system the world once believed could stop anything.